Now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, we talked to Representative Dwight Kay, who lost his re-election bid for the House, on the frustration many legislators are feeling toward legislative leaders during the budget stalemate. We also ask what he would do to turn the state around, and how he thinks President-elect Donald Trump could change the federal government. Then in about 20 minutes from now, we talked to Representative Rita about the so-called ComEd bill, which he co-sponsored, that would subsidize 2 nuclear power plants in Illinois. Afterward, we talked to Dave Lundy, a spokesperson for the BEST Coalition, about why his organization opposes the ComEd bill. Following that, in about 50 minutes from now, Illinois Secretary of Transportation Randall Blankenhorn gives an address on the transportation transformation the state is going under. Then in about 1 hour and 10 minutes from now, we talk to Don Schaefter, Executive Vice President of the Midwest Truckers Association, about what the passage of the Safe Roads Amendment will mean for Illinois transportation. And finally, in about 1 hour and 30 minutes from now, Illinois Channel correspondent Jeff Berkowitz sits down with the Manhattan Institute's Heather McDonald as she discusses her book, The War on Cops. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
Hi, I'm Phil Garnett, President of the Illinois Coal Association. Illinois is blessed with an abundance of coal. In fact, coal lies under 65% of Illinois land, and coal is used to provide half of the nation's energy needs, abundant and domestic. With energy independence at the top of our national agenda, Illinois coal mines, like the one here in Williamsville, must be part of our national discussion on energy. That's why the Illinois Coal Association supports the work of the Illinois Channel. Their extensive coverage of the role Illinois coal plays in meeting America's energy needs is a valuable contribution to informed discussion on a serious issue, such as the Illinois Channel's coverage of the FutureGen project, which holds a promise of environmentally friendly use of coal, or the Illinois Channel's unedited, in-depth interview with Fred Palmer of Peabody Energy. Serious coverage of serious issues. That's the Illinois Channel. You keep up the good work, and we'll keep watching.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Representative Dwight Kay, who lost his re-election bid for the House, on the frustration many legislators are feeling toward legislative leaders during the budget stalemate. We also ask what he would do to turn the state around, and how he thinks President-elect Donald Trump could change the federal government. This runs about 20 minutes.
Representative Dwight Kay, thank you for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. Sadly, to say you were one of the, actually the only Republican, I believe, isn't it?
I think that's right.
From the House to lose the election. We wanted to visit with you and discuss a number of issues, but also just to get your perspective of everything that you've seen here in your time in the legislature, as we are here in what might be your last day actively as a member of the House, since this is the fall veto session. Let's remind viewers, when were you first elected?
2009, I took office in 2010.
So, in the broad scope of things, you came in with some ideas. You wanted to bring your business acumen and apply it. What would you say when people ask, so what's going on with the legislature and the legislative process? What's your perspective?
Yeah. Well, the process is a fine process if it works as intended. But when you throw a monkey wrench into it, as has happened the last 6 years that I've been here, it kind of breaks down much like a car that's not well maintained, and you no longer have process. You have people meeting and arguing, and sometimes bitterly arguing, but there's nothing that, from a transactional standpoint, really gets done.
And that's not what the process is about. We're sent here to do the job of the people that we represent. And that's been thwarted, at least for me, in the past 6 years. And I think if you were to talk to other representatives, they'd feel very much the same way.
You know, just yesterday, Speaker Madigan came out of the meeting with the governor, and the governor made his comments, and basically nothing has changed. I mean, it's been 18 months. They're still in a tug of war. No one wants to give on either side. What is the mood? You talk to your Democratic colleagues, I'm sure, as well as the Republican colleagues. What is the mood of what we might call the backbenchers, the non-leaders who aren't going into those meetings? Is there or is there not a growing frustration of what's happening with the state?
Well, I think the frustration started growing last year, mid-year. And I think it's been building. And I think you're about to see an explosion of sorts, a discontent come out of I would say both caucuses, and there's outrage right now. And so I say when explosion, I should say outrage that we don't have a budget in this state. Now, as I understand it today,
we're the only state in the nation.
Only state that doesn't have a budget, and that's absolute folly, because it's not only constitutionally mandated, but it's the responsibility of the people we send here to get that done. And the unfortunate part of it is the people who are here, I honestly believe, in terms of the legislators or the senators that are here, I honestly believe they want to get the job done. Now, there may be a few exceptions, but the politics of Illinois is such that it just doesn't happen.
And who do you blame?
Well, I've been very critical of Speaker Madigan. There's no doubt in my mind that he runs this state, as much as I dislike saying that. He runs the state, he runs it with an iron hand, and process doesn't matter, nor do people matter to him. But politics matters, and so that's why we're in the fix we're in, because we're playing politics and we're not taking care of people.
And as a result of not having a budget, we are spending more than we would have with a budget. The comptroller's office says we're going to have something like $13 billion of unpaid bills by the end of the year, so we're 30 days away from that.
Exactly.
At what point, and we should tell people you are a business executive,
Yes.
you've been for long, so you know you're fiscal conservative, you know sound money management. At what point do we cross the threshold to where the liabilities that we build up in the state are such that we're just never going to be in a position to catch up to them?
Well, you may be there or fast approaching that point now. And I say that just based on the liabilities that we're staring in the face, and yet no plan to deal with them. And I refer, of course, to pensions.
Which are estimated at about $30 billion?
$30 billion, yeah.
Unfunded liability.
Unfunded liability. Now, I don't believe that takes into account the unanticipated losses from the pension funds itself, where monies were invested by, taking an example, teachers' money that they put into the fund, and then somebody invests that money for them. The returns have never been as high as predicted, and today they're not nearly as high as they should be. So having said that, we may be looking at additional liabilities to that $130 billion. But, you know, the truth of the matter is we're at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to addressing this issue, and we're at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to where we stand with respect to honoring our pension obligations.
Well, and I want to point out to people, not to depress everyone, but just so they are aware. The state is one government, $130 billion unfunded liabilities. The city of Chicago is a different government. Their fire and police, they've made efforts to catch up. They've made some progress, but that's still woefully underfunded. The Chicago public schools are all but bankrupt. Some people argue they ought to declare bankruptcy.
Right.
Just today, the governor vetoed a bill that would have put $215 million to the Chicago public schools, but because it was tied in his veto message to a deal on the pensions, which we don't have, he vetoed that bill.
Right.
So I don't know that we're ever, even if we go north of 2% national growth, which hopefully we will, and that'll help the state coffers. If the economy grows, and the economy grows in Illinois, we'll have more revenue. It seems like a huge hurdle to ever catch up. And again, when you talk to what extent do you get a sense, and I'm just really asking, I'm not trying to lead the witness, so to speak, but to what extent do you get a sense that your fellow members, to what extent are they concerned about that, or are they aware of it? Do they think about these numbers, or are they not?
Well, they're aware of the numbers, but they're also aware that the process has broken down, and we're essentially dysfunctional. And I don't want to depress too many people either, but good government starts with telling the truth, and that's the truth. We are a dysfunctional body, and as I said before, the reason we're dysfunctional is because we have one man who is not interested in the process, and he's not interested in people, and so what's left? Politics. And I'm concerned, while we throw numbers around, and it may be discouraging to people, we can't go bankrupt. But you can get to a point where you're so financially dysfunctional, or you're to the point where you can't pay your bills, so you default. And that's a business term, default. Now, in business, you can go bankrupt.
And
Illinois,
the city could, but not the state.
that is correct. That's exactly right. The state cannot. So when you start writing checks that you can't cover, or they bounce, or they come back in some form or fashion, that's a whole different matter that somebody is going to have to deal with.
So to make that clear, if the court says, which they have, you can't cut pension benefits because it's in the Constitution, but at some point we're going to come to, and it might be sooner rather than later, where we just don't have the money. The money's not in the checking account to send those pension beneficiaries their check. We will not have legally cut the pensions, but the comptroller will just be sitting on checks that can't be issued.
And you're right. I would think in that particular case, if we see that come to fruition sooner than later, you may see pension checks cut, but cut for less than is due. And that's my fear, because we do owe that liability. That's a promise. It's in the Constitution. The Supreme Court in Illinois has decided 7-0 that we need to pay it. And I think they also said, hey, we need a plan. And there is no plan, and that's because we've put people second to politics.
Let me remind the people, or have you remind them, what is it you do, and what's your position with the trucking company?
Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of a trucking company in Edwardsville, Illinois. In fact, we're one of the largest trucking companies, car haul trucking companies in America and Canada. So working with numbers and working with finance and keeping things stable is what I'm used to doing. And so it's very hard to watch what's happening here, because it's just it's contrary to what normal business people do. Contrary.
Does your firm have a pension?
It does.
Is it funded? What level of funding is it, just to compare a private sector?
No,
it's a 401k kind of a plan.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a businessman and somebody who deals with businesses constantly because of the nature of your business, what do you tell your constituents? What do you tell the business community when they ask you about what's going on in Springfield?
Well, I've told them that there has to be a way to remove Mike Madigan from being Speaker of the House, because that's the impediment to getting any progress done. We need reforms in the state. Mike Madigan doesn't want reforms. We need people who rein in money. Mike Madigan doesn't want to rein in money. Mike Madigan wants to pick favorites. We don't pick favorites. We work for the people of the state of Illinois, so we shouldn't be picking favorites. I honestly speaking, while I like the Speaker as an individual, I think he's far past his time in the House, and I think he leaves, when he does leave, he leaves with a legacy that is not one of anything very positive.
And then as we close out, again, knowing what you know, if you were in control of, if you had the power to affect change, what changes would you make to turn this state around, given the tremendous financial challenges we face?
Well, the first thing, and maybe the easiest thing to do, although it wouldn't be popular, would be to consolidate in a number of different areas. And we certainly then would need to look at how effective all the townships are that we have in this state. By the way, we have the largest state government in the nation by some 250.
In terms of what is it the largest?
Well, government entities that are so-called working for
units of government.
Exactly. So I'm told that we've got townships that are way beyond flush with money. All they do is buy new trucks, don't do a lot of work. We've got duplication in our school systems where we could consolidate some of these schools and still provide an adequate education. So those are two really big areas of cutting out something we really don't need. It's archaic. Most states don't bother with townships. We've continued to do it because, there's some political benefit in, patronage. We need to do that. And we need then to look at how we can consolidate various school districts and various other systems within the state. I would also argue that a good auditor could go through our books, look at the grants and look at the return on that grant money, and make a good argument that we're giving money away in terms of grants that aren't needed, that produce absolutely no result that's meaningful.
And we will see what happens now. I mean, one of the changes is obviously going to be there's going to be a President Trump, an entirely different direction of the federal government. They're going to be looking at reforms. We don't know yet what impact that might have in Illinois, but again, you're a Republican, he's a Republican, so I'm imagining you're in favor of it. But what are your thoughts about going forward relative to this change at the federal level?
Well, one of the things that I'm encouraged by in seeing President Trump, President-elect Trump, coming into office is this. I've turned over a number of cases of pretty egregious fraud, pretty egregious wasteful spending to the U.S. Attorney's Office and others of authority, and nothing's been done with that information. It's big dollars, and I'm just...
When you say big, like what area are we talking? Millions of dollars?
Yeah, maybe more than that. There's been, in fact, I filed House Resolution 168 that has to do with adoption and child care and some pretty clear wrongdoing in that area within a department. And I filed a resolution yesterday. I've turned information over to support my resolution, and I'm also sending letters off to the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and to the department heads here in Springfield. Again, that's what business people do. They dig in, they find waste because that's their profit. That's your profit. So I think President Trump, if Senator Sessions is indeed put in the office or becomes Attorney General and is affirmed in the Senate, confirmed, I think you're going to see a president and a senator who will then be Attorney General go after these things pretty quickly. Big change.
I'm sure we wish well for the state. We face these enormous challenges. Hopefully we keep in contact with you, and
Absolutely.
We wish you well. And
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Thank you very much.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Representative Robert Rita about the so-called ComEd bill, which he co-sponsored, that would subsidize 2 nuclear power plants in Illinois. This runs about 15 minutes.
Representative Bob Rita, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. We wanted to talk to you. You are the House sponsor of the bill, the ComEd bill as it is called, and to get your viewpoints on why this is needed. Why don't you give us the big overview?
Well, and this has been around for some time, and what we're doing in this Senate Bill 2814 is setting a policy for Illinois energy policy for the next several years, and it's a big comprehensive plan that takes in a number of parts dealing with energy. Major parts is the RPS, creating and sustaining the jobs, and becoming more energy efficiency as we move forward.
As I understand the issue, and I only will admit to vaguely understanding it, it is a complex bill. ComEd, which is owned by Exelon, but ComEd is saying these two plants, one in the Quad Cities and one in Clinton, that they are losing money and they will close these plants down without some subsidies. Is that basically?
Yes. Well, so here, let me back up. It started with three bills. One that was initiated by Exelon, one that was initiated by the Green and the environmental community, and then one by ComEd. And that was the beginning. And I had the ComEd, Representative Walsh had the Exelon portion, and Representative Elaine Neckeritz had the clean, the environmental bill. And what we've done is worked together and put all three bills into one bill. So we have a big, major, complex bill dealing with the Exelon portion in terms of the two plants in Clinton and Quad Cities are set to close. Today is a deadline date for them to shut down due to the price of energy and generation that their business model.
So let me jump in there. So today's the deadline for them to send a letter out to say we're going to close it down like next summer.
Yes. So that would be the step into shutting and closing down the plant.
Can they send a letter that we're going to close it down, but then later withdraw the letter?
Yes, but in how the process, you have to go through a number of processes and notify, because putting energy on a grid, there has to be some notifications. This would be a step in notification. Today we are successful and pass this, they could, would be able to back step out of where they are, because that already started for the Clinton area. Clinton's doing it in Quad City, so it's already been in the process. But basically, there's that's one component. The other component of the bill is energy efficiency in using other forms of generation other than nuclear and coal, promoting solar and wind.
When you say promoting it, that sounds like a marketing plan. Are we giving them money? Are we giving them more subsidies?
No. Well, and there's basically there's a number of subsidies and initiatives but to start moving towards more energy efficiency and using cleaner energy as we move forward. And
what about those opposed would say Illinois is currently producing 140% of our needs in electricity, so this power generation just isn't needed. Go ahead and close down the plants. We don't need that power generation, so why subsidize something we don't need?
Well, it's about the jobs. It's about the number of jobs that Illinois would lose on that portion for the Exelon and what they contribute to the Illinois economy. And the jobs and the money that from these employees and what it would mean to the state of Illinois as a whole is the portion on the Exelon part. Now, and there's provisions and caps and checks and balances all reviewed by the ICC that if these generation plants start to make money, if they're the price and they start becoming profitable, the subsidy goes down to they would lose the subsidy at a certain point. So it's all scaled in. There's checks and balances that it's not just here's a subsidy and you get it. If they start to turn around and we don't know the future of energy, the price of future energy price.
Do you know, and I will say for the viewers that there keeps being new renditions of the bill, so it's a hard to follow. What are the latest, in fact, wording of the do we know how much money what kind of a subsidy are we talking about in dollar terms? Do you have a number on that?
Well, and there's on the different for all the different components there is, because there's money for solar, there's money for wind, there's money for Exelon, there's money for
how much for Exelon?
This keeps changing here because we're continuing to negotiate. We're at $220 million.
Is that one time or yearly?
No, and this is over the course of the program of 13 years, and then, but it's all tied into the energy efficiency. As we get more efficient, the more in using these renewable energies and clean energy. So it's all sort of intertwined. So that's what makes it so difficult when you move one part of this, it moves three other parts, and each part is all intertwined to make this all work. We brought a lot of people together, a lot of stakeholders that were all in different directions, and we're pretty much...
Let me ask you, so the wind and solar producers, and that's a subsidized industry. They're not market competitive, so those producers are subsidized. They're already subsidized. Are they getting an additional subsidy?
What they have a fund where money's gone into the fund, and right now that money is not accessible. So it'll free up that money along with the new monies that are going into these to expand solar, wind, and other forms of generation. So just like with the Exelon, so there's components. They're all components that would have a rebates and funding tied to them.
When we say saving the jobs, do you know off the top of your head how many jobs would be lost if they closed down?
My understanding is about 4,200 between the two plants, and that it's been estimated with the bill, with the creation of jobs, because the new with the solar and the wind would be over 8,000 jobs. But with the two plants, I was told around 4,200.
Now, so one of as we were just talking, and as the critics have said, this keeps changing so dramatically. I think we're on version 8 over the last 4 days.
Here, let me clarify that.
And the question is this: I mean, what's the bum's rush? Why can't we give more time on something as complex as this is? In the hearing this morning, some of the ComEd people at the table answering questions of Senator Harmon were having some difficulty explaining their own bill.
Well, the difficulty comes in terms of the complexity and how this all works. The bill has been, as introduced as it has been being reduced. So this is not new components when we're talking about Amendment 5, 6, 7, and 8. These are, a number of them are technical in terms of drafting errors, putting dates on when things would be enacted, when different programs would end. So it's not dramatically changing when we're talking about these additional amendments. It's fixing or fixing some of the drafting errors, along with tweaking some of the
so it's not
language.
radical changes.
There's not radical changes in these, and that's why they will go to the floor versus the committee. The main of the bill has been heard in committee on a couple of occasions, and since a few weeks ago, it's been dramatically reduced in the amount of money it is and in what's being proposed. I mean, we went from demand rates to that being pulled out, to having coal possibly part of it, and we brought all the stakeholders and heard the concerns, and that's how we've crafted this to where we're at today.
Has anyone in the negotiations, if we have 140% in the state of Illinois, in other words, we're generating 40% more than we need presently. Now, hopefully, our economy improves and our electrical consumption would improve, right, or go up. But if we're having 140%, and if Exelon is selling that excess capacity on the spot market and making money, has anyone ever said, give us some of that profit back if we're giving you the subsidy, so we can have some kind of if we're going to participate in the downside, let's participate as a state in the upside.
Well, and when you talk in them terms of, this is all being regulated on a federal level, and so we have the jobs. The jobs are in Illinois. So we're exporting some of that electricity out, but the 4,200 jobs are in Illinois. And their business model would shut that down and say, okay, well, we're going to shut these plants down, which they've said they will because of them not because of the plants actually losing money. We would lose the jobs. So it's the jobs portion on the Exelon piece is what is important to Illinois.
Yeah, but on the other hand, if we're going to give them money, couldn't we participate in the profit? To say, we'll guarantee you this subsidy, but if you make a profit, why don't we participate?
There are checks and balances. As they start to make profit, and there is, the subsidy goes down. Okay. So there is a check and balance tied to that. And the important part is putting that funding in for them is to keep the jobs. So as they would, you're saying, would all of a sudden big, huge profits would come, there's provisions.
And then the subsidy
would drop to a certain point to nothing if they were making that much money. Okay. And that's to protect the consumers.
If we don't pass it today, is there an ability to push it off and then maybe whether early in January to come back and with that extra time to go ahead and still pass it?
Right now, and things, and you have a bill like this, things have been changing. But right now, the goal is to pass this before we leave here today, and that's the timeline. And what I've been working on, what we've all been working on, is to have this done today.
And we should say that this is the last day of the session. We got, maybe 3 hours left or so. By the time we air this, we'll know whether or not it passed. But Representative Bob Rita, we know you're busy. Thank you for joining us. We'll have to follow the events as they flow through the legislature.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. All right? Yep.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Dave Lundy, a spokesperson for the Best Coalition, about why his organization opposes the so-called ComEd bill, which would use state funds to subsidize 2 nuclear power plants in Illinois. This runs about 20 minutes.
Dave Lundy, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. Before I begin, let me tell the viewers that you are a member of our board, but in your normal life, you're also engaged in public policy matters, and you're engaged in one of the major pieces of legislation going through the fall veto session, what is often referred to as the ComEd bill. You are in opposition to it. What is the issues that you have with the bill?
Well, I run a coalition called the Best Coalition. We are composed of businesses, consumer groups, energy companies that are deeply concerned about the $11 billion bailout that's currently contemplated for nuclear plants, as well as even the energy efficiency pieces that sound great, but are actually a vehicle to put another couple $2 billion in guaranteed profits into ComEd's coffers. The challenge is that these nuclear facilities are not needed. Our state has 41% more power than we need. Our demand is actually shrinking, not growing. And so Illinois has competitive markets. They were advocated for by ComEd and Exelon 20 years ago, with the theory being that it will help lower energy prices. It's done so, which is one of the only competitive advantages that Illinois has for attracting businesses, is lower energy prices. So many of our allies in this fight are people like the Manufacturers Association and the Chemical Industry Council, as well as AARP and the Attorney General's office, all of whom recognize this is a very, very bad bill and definitely shouldn't be done in 2 days of veto session down in Springfield. I mean, literally, they have dropped 3 different bills. We're actually now waiting for amendments 8 and 9. And as of Monday, we had Amendment 1. So literally, these things are coming out every couple hours. You got to analyze them. And the devil, Terry, is in the details. And what we keep finding every time they disclose language for these bills, we find these things that are just terrible for ratepayers.
You know, say for the viewers, just to follow up on your comments, yeah, this keeps moving, and as I said to you off camera, I'm not really familiar with it because unless it's someone like yourself who's dedicated solely to paying attention, it is changing the landscape on this legislation so radically from time to time. that what's also interesting is politically, some of the people that would normally be your allies are now with ComEd, and some of the people that would normally be on the other side of the issue with you are with you. And so it's a strange mix, and why it's also fascinating, but as you say, very important bill that could mean, I don't know, billions of dollars over the course of this contract or the deal that would be put together. One of the things people say, let me have you address this. They say we shouldn't do a deal with ComEd, which is owned by Exelon, in part because they say the corporation of Exelon is making billions of dollars in profit, and they don't need the money to be subsidizing, or we shouldn't be subsidizing their plants. But others would say, if I'm running 5 retail stores, let's say 5 hamburger shops, and 2 of them are losing money, I would still close those down, even if I'm making a profit on the rest of them. Why would that argument not hold water in this case?
Well, no, actually it does hold water, which is that, okay, close them down. If you're losing money, close them down. And here's the thing. Exelon for decades in this state argued with people who wanted to get subsidies to do things like the Future Gen plant or the Taylorville project or any of a number of things. And Exelon always said, you know what, you live or die based on the market. If your plant can survive in the market, then so be it. You should go ahead and build it. If not, you shouldn't. That was Exelon that led all of those fights against everybody else who wanted subsidies. So they were great with having no subsidies when it benefited them. Then suddenly the energy markets changed because of fracking, and the low natural gas prices have driven down the price of electricity in our state.
So their competition, the fossil fuel generators, as compared to nuclear, can now undercut their prices.
Exactly. And suddenly when they become stressed, they turn around and say, oh, well, it's not fair that we don't get subsidies for our carbon-free attributes, and we should have those subsidies. And we're like, well, we were paying attention to what you said last year and the year before. So as somebody who's been dealing with these guys for more than a decade, I can tell you the hypocrisy is really, really astonishing.
What about the argument that, one of the plants is in Clinton? It's a small community in central Illinois. It's a major taxpayer supporting the schools, and then you have the same argument, I would think, up in the Quad Cities where you have the other plant. What about the argument that the cost of closing these down, the loss of tax revenues over X period of years, that it's worth subsidizing them to keep the employment, the tax base, et cetera?
That's a great question. So the taxes that the plant pays in Clinton are $13 million a year. To Clinton, that would be devastating. So let's find a way to fill those tax holes. But this bill is going to cost the average Illinoisan, well, not the average Illinoisan, but this bill is going to cost $850 million a year. You don't need to have an $850 million bill to pay them $13 million. There are funds available that could be tapped in order for that purpose. We are strongly in favor. In fact, I shared a draft of a bill with Senator Nybo yesterday of a community transition plan. But the idea that the General Assembly can hold back the tides of the market when things have changed so dramatically, it's just not realistic over the long haul. And the problem is, as demand continues to shrink, you're going to have more and more excess capacity in our state, and that means those subsidies are going to have to grow if you want to keep those plants online. Simply put,
those subsidies not capped?
Well, they are capped today at $235 million, but it's not hard to come back to the General Assembly and say, oh, well, we have a structure, we just need you to change this percentage, and then voila, there's another $1 billion. So they are desperate to get a broad-based subsidy for their nuclear fleet. I understand that, but I'm sorry, guys. You want to live or die by the market, you have to live or die by the market. And the other thing is that what winds up happening is as we pay more in these subsidies to keep these plants open, and we're exporting 41% of our power, and that number is growing, that means people in Illinois are going to pay more so people in neighboring states can pay less for their electricity. That just doesn't make any sense. Electricity is one of the only competitive advantages we have, and we need to keep it that way.
So to be clear, you're saying the capacity versus the use in Illinois that we're generating 140%. In other words, we got 40%
Correct.
excess capacity, and so they're selling that juice on the market.
Correct, and they're selling it on the market, and it's 40% of it's going out of state.
Has anyone discussed saying, if we're going to subsidize you, then we want to share in the profits? If you're selling 40% on the market, then do some kind of a profit share so that if you're losing money, you got the subsidy. If you're making money, we'll share in the benefit.
Terry, I love how you think. It's funny you mention that, because one of our complaints with the last version of the bill and the version before it was that it didn't take into account how power plants actually work and how the market actually works. So power plants make money in all kinds of ways, and they often will sell direct bilateral contracts with other states. Exelon recently sold 800 megawatts, which is almost the size of the Clinton plant, to Ohio for 3 years for almost double what they get here in Illinois. Those revenues would not have counted against their subsidy. So there are all kinds of avenues for revenues that they just don't count. It's like if you went to a McDonald's and you say, well, what's your revenue picture? And they gave you the amount they make for fries and hamburgers, but they didn't tell you about their shakes and everything else. And that's the way they're trying to play it, and this is what these guys do. We've been down this block again and again and again, and the problem is when you dump a 500-plus page bill on members of the General Assembly and say, okay, you've got 20 minutes to analyze it, we're going to have a committee hearing in 20 minutes, which, by the way, is exactly what happened yesterday, and then they're going to dump another and another and a number. You can't expect everybody to be able to digest all of this quickly. That's the biggest problem. That's frankly why editorial boards around the state have all come out against this.
I was going to bring up this very point. When you have a bill this complex, in fact, earlier today at a committee hearing, Senator Don Harmon, who's one of the Democratic Senate leaders, is not a dumb man by any measure.
One of the smartest men in the General Assembly.
Yeah, he does his homework, but he was grappling with trying to understand the details because of the terminology. I mean, it's not the kind of thing where you're naming a post office after somebody. This is layers and layers and layers of complexity, which I don't mean to argue one way or the other on the issue, but to say the way we pass legislation sometimes is something that we might want to consider as far as why do we have to pass something that complex in such a short amount of time is perhaps a comment.
Well, and in fact, I was in that hearing. I testified at that hearing, and Senator Harmon was just trying to get the folks from ComEd and Exelon to explain their bill. And they struggled for more than an hour to explain, well, how do these rate caps work that supposedly you have in there? And we came up and explained that, in fact, they're circumventing the rate caps in various ways. But look, if you are a proponent of something and you can't explain it, then maybe you don't understand your own bill well enough. And maybe we shouldn't be trying to rush through this. And let's see, it's now 4 hours left in session, and we hear there are 2 more amendments coming. This is no way to run a railroad.
You know, lastly, let me just say, the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, which had always been against the ComEd deal, came out with a statement, I believe yesterday afternoon, might have been this morning, in favor of it. You're saying the manufacturers, which I haven't had a chance to touch base with, are against it, is that
manufacturers, the Chamber, the Tooling and Manufacturing Association, the Chemical Industry Council, the Petroleum Council.
Let me just say, normally IRMA, the retailers, and the manufacturers are in lockstep with it.
Correct.
Again, we talked earlier about the odd political, it's almost like a break on a pool table, the way the politics work here. What accounts for IRMA being for it, if you know, and the manufacturers being against it? In both cases, they were concerned about the cost to their membership.
Right. So I would never want to speak for another association.
I was going to say, I'm asking you an unfair question because I'm asking you to speak, but maybe if you
can speak to their members. Because one of the things that my coalition has done pretty effectively, we have energy experts, we have consultants, we are constantly modeling every potential change that ComEd or Exelon is proposing. And so we've modeled this for their members. This is going to kill their members. It's terrible. 60% of the ratepayers in Illinois are in the commercial and industrial class under 10 megawatts. and that's the class that most of the IRMA members are in. This is going to cost some of these members hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in extra cost. And you think about that, the people in that rate class also include your hospitals and your schools and your school district. We did an analysis. We found this is going to cost the Chicago Public Schools $2.5 million a year. City of Chicago more than $5 million a year, and on and on and on. It's our understanding one of the reasons that the governor was initially hesitant, because he got a lot of pressure from school boards who were like, we have no more money. The cupboard's bare. What are you doing? So I don't want to speculate why IRMA is for this bill. We think that that they're mistaken in the analysis. And I'll say one other thing about the cost issue. So what IRMA will say, and they'll cite this report that they did and the reports that were in the state about 2 years ago that came out called the Section 11, or the Resolution 1146 reports, that claim if you shut these plants, prices will go way, way up. Turns out, though, we've analyzed those as well, and those reports were based on assumptions that have proven over time to be completely false. So they assumed natural gas prices would be as high as $7.65, and natural gas prices are $2.80. So you've overstated the impact dramatically, and then they also said you're going to have to replace 100% of the plant's power. Well, in a 41% surplus market, no, you don't have to replace 100%. Demand isn't growing, it's shrinking. And in fact, the authors of the report, of the 1146 report, put language in the foreword, and they did it specifically so that Exelon couldn't abuse the reports, which hasn't stopped them, but the language said these reports are based on, or these analyses are based on specific assumptions. Each analysis is based on specific assumption, and if those assumptions change, the analysis has to change as well. And they have changed dramatically.
So, as we close out, let me just say, what accounts for the energy going down in the state usage? And secondly, what about the argument that we've had a relatively flat economic growth over the last 10 years. Hopefully that changes. One would think that would generate a lot more electrical demand. So what about the argument that says we might have 40% excess capacity now, but we still have to have that excess capacity so we have room to grow?
Well, we have excess capacity, and the excess capacity has been growing, not shrinking. The demand is shrinking for two reasons. One, it's shrinking because we're all becoming more efficient. Your appliances are more efficient. You buy Energy Star appliances. Your light bulbs are no longer incandescent. They're mostly LEDs or compact fluorescents. Businesses have been investing hundreds of millions of dollars every year in energy efficiency programs because for many of these large businesses, energy is the largest expense they have. So demand is going down because we're all becoming more efficient. We built this electrical system for a different economy that was far less efficient. So we just simply don't need all of the plants that are currently out there. The other thing that this morning Mark Beal from the Chemical Industry Council testified in the hearing, he said, look, the competitive markets in Illinois are working great. There's a natural gas plant that's going to be built off of their own balance sheet. They're not asking ratepayers for money. And it's going to replace the Clinton plant in terms of the size. Now, it's not needed to replace Clinton in that way because we have so much excess power, but the markets can take care of this. I know you're a markets guy, and so you appreciate this, and our roles are normally reversed since I'm the Democrat and you assume I don't understand markets, but in fact, in energy, I understand markets quite well. And so we think we'll be better off if Illinois preserves its competitive markets.
All right, Dave Lundy, thanks so much. It's a complex issue. We appreciate you shining some light on it.
I appreciate you taking the time.
Next, from Chicago, Illinois Secretary of Transportation Randall Blankenhorn gives an address on the transportation transformation the state is going under. This runs about 20 minutes.
Thanks, Ed and Jay. I appreciate that introduction, and it is always a pleasure to be back at the City Club. I'm glad that Ed said to turn off your phones because Beth reminded me that if not, all of you would be doing your Cyber Monday shopping. So thank you for not doing that while I'm talking. It's been just over a year since I've been here, last time we talked a lot about what I think is a transportation transformation that we are truly in the midst of. We talked about changes in technology, how we need to rethink project development and project delivery. We need to think about new funding opportunities and the inefficiencies that we have inside the department, and how to make things work better. A lot has happened in the last year. First of all, the Cubs won a World Series. As a lifelong Cubs fan, I can tell you if that can happen, anything can happen here in Illinois. And so we're looking forward to what the future brings. We also have a budget in place at IDOT that takes us through the entire fiscal year, one of only a handful of state agencies that have that, and it underscores Governor Rauner's commitment to transportation. We also, since the last time I was here, have a multi-year federal transportation bill, the first in a decade. And we have a new president-elect who talks about significant investments in transportation and other infrastructure, and we'll have to wait and see how all that plays out. But on behalf of Governor Rauner and the entire team at the Illinois Department of Transportation, thanks for having me today. Despite the ongoing chaos in Springfield, good things are happening at the department under the leadership of Governor Rauner, and I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about some of those issues and some of the challenges that we still face. Let's start with project delivery and project development. We always say that transportation investment is about how we drive economies and how we strengthen communities, and yet we don't do a good job of measuring that when we make those investments. We're good at measuring bridge condition and road condition, safety and traffic, but the public wants more than that from their transportation investments. Through a grant that we got from the Chicago Community Trust, which I think is maybe one of the first philanthropic grants to a state agency to help with their operations, we're working with Transportation for America to create true measures that we can use to prioritize projects based on economic development, economic opportunity, and the way we can strengthen communities. We've learned a lot about what other states are doing, who've dipped their toes in the water already in this issues, and we plan to start this year with thinking about how we can use true measures that can measure what does it mean to our transportation system when we make investments. How do we think about transportation investments in a new and different way? And we're going to start by focusing on our capital programs and particularly on those new capacity programs and projects. We aren't waiting for a perfect system. I have found since I've been back to government that too often we wait for perfect at the expense of good, that we need to try things, we need to see what works and what doesn't work, and we're going to put this out and try it. And we're going to find things that work well, and we're going to find things that don't work so well, and we're going to figure it out and rethink what we're doing. We're also getting serious about life cycle costs, something I've talked to many of you about before. We need to utilize the work that we're doing on pavement and bridge management and get away from a worst first mentality. We need to think long-term about the assets that we own, and we need to think about how much it costs to own and not how much it costs to build and maintain. It's going to be a new way of thinking for us, a new way of prioritizing projects and figuring out how we get the best out of our system throughout its life and not just thinking about what does it cost to replace. We're continuing to work with local communities in rethinking their corridor improvements that are such a vital part of their economic development strategies. To be frank, we can't build 4-lane highways in every part of Illinois. It just isn't going to happen, and we need to figure out how to solve today's problems while continuing to look to the future. I've asked our staff to figure out how to get 80% of the existing value. What is the problem we're trying to solve, and how do we solve 80% of it at 50% of the cost? That doesn't mean asking communities to let go of their long-held dreams, but to rethink their needs, and maybe someday, when their member of Congress becomes Speaker of the House, that dream can happen. One of Governor Rauner's passions is truly getting rid of the red tape that it costs businesses to do business here in Illinois, and particularly with state government. When I walked into the Secretary's office in early 2015, agreements with our consulting engineers were taking 270 days to process. 9 months. A simply unacceptable and ridiculous amount of time to do what is a basic part of our job. In the last year, we've cut that in half to 135 days, and we'll get it down to the 90 days that I promised you when I got here. It will make that happen. But we're doing the same thing in so many of our other processes throughout the agency. So you're going to continue to see improvements in how we deal with you and how we deal with the public and how to see improvements in the services that we deliver. We've tasked each bureau and each district with identifying where can we be smarter, where can we do a better job of cutting red tape, and I've asked them to consider each step of those processes and ask themselves, are we adding any value? Does this step add value, and if not, why are we doing it? What do we need to do to make things work better? As I talk to our partners, particularly in the construction side of the business, I've heard results already. Talking to companies, and they say, we see a difference in the field where people are allowed to make decisions, where your staff is making decisions day to day and not waiting weeks for somebody to make a decision that's sitting in an office some 100 miles away. In the same vein, we strongly embraced our first reorganization of the agency in decades. We did it to break down silos, to improve communication, and to get the agency talking to each other. Our prime example when I got here of this was our real concerns that we weren't going to be able to deliver the Chicago to St. Louis high-speed rail project in time to meet the federal deadlines. We had expertise inside the department that could help our rail group with issues like land acquisition, like engineering, and yet we weren't communicating across those division lines. We brought together that expertise from the districts and our divisions, and I'm confident that we're going to deliver the high-speed rail project inside of our federal guidelines. And given that, we're poised to start delivering some real benefits of improved passenger rail service to the public. Not only reduced travel times, but as importantly, better reliability, making passenger rail a true option for people traveling in the I-55 corridor. A month ago, we opened a new station in Dwight, the first of several to come online in our Springfield-St. Louis corridor. We have new locomotives coming to the Midwest that will start to be online in 2017. And as a result of this, I think our downstate communities will begin to see real economic development potential, as well as the metro regions that frame the I-55 corridor. We not need to only invest wiser and cut red tape, but we need to deliver projects in more innovative ways. After years of conversation with many of you in the industry, we've come to agreement on legislation that will allow us to utilize design build, contract manager, and alternative technical concepts to deliver projects faster and at lower costs, and I look forward to working with Senator Sandoval to get those through his committee and out of the General Assembly. While these delivery options aren't for every project, and in fact, they aren't for most, we need to have the ability to utilize them where they make sense. We also need to find new ways to leverage private investment in our system. We're creating a new Bureau of Innovative Project Delivery in the Office of Planning and Programming to analyze opportunities to bring in private sector dollars into transportation projects. We need to develop that expertise in-house and start to think about how we deliver projects at the beginning of the development process, not try to force-fit P3s into our existing projects. We have had some early successes with our managed lane projects on the Stevenson Expressway and with the Hobolt Bridge project in Will County, but there's much more to do. On the Stevenson, we received federal environmental approval this summer to construct an additional tolled express lane in each direction between I-355 and the Dan Ryan Expressway. We're going to proceed with delivering this project as a public-private partnership as soon as we get the blessing of the Illinois General Assembly. This fall, we held a request for information workshop to solicit ideas from private industry on how best to deliver this project. Over 200 interested parties attended an open house, and 17 teams, including local contractors and consultants, as well as some of the biggest multinational firms in the world, met with us to discuss the project and their thoughts on how to best deliver it. I'm going to repeat that because it's important. 17 of the biggest firms in the world came to us to talk about how they could deliver a project here in Illinois that's ready to go, that's ready to happen, and ready to do in a new and different way. Once we have that extra capacity on I-55, we can begin to address congestion issues on other expressways, starting with the Eisenhower. I believe the I-55 Managed Lanes project can be a model that we can use elsewhere when conditions are right. Under direction of Governor Rauner, this summer we reached a first-of-its-kind agreement between local and state government and the private sector to build a new Hobolt Road Bridge, a vital improvement necessary to keep up with our booming logistics industry. CenterPoint will build a bridge from I-80 into their intermodal facilities, home to thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in freight activity annually. To leverage that, IDOT is going to build an improved connection from I-80 into the bridge. With Joliet as the lead agency, another partnership that we're using to make this job go faster, to make it grow smoother, to make things happen quickly, We anticipate utilizing a diverging diamond interchange, like the one that's working so well at I-88 and Illinois 59, to more safely move traffic, particularly trucks, into and out of Center Point. At a total cost of about $200 million, the public is getting a 10-to-1 return on its investment on this project. That's truly a win for everyone, and I believe we need to keep this template alive as we look at how we're going to address economic development opportunities on a targeted strategic basis across the state. Innovative projects like these, I hope, are sending a message that it's no longer business as usual at IDOT. We're seeing other examples of funding packages that rethink the role of state and local government in delivering projects. Counties and cities are wanting to partner with the state to deliver important state and local projects faster. Traditional funding splits need to be thrown out, and more flexible funding combinations are going to be the future of how we get things done. We've seen this in our CREATE program, where we not only have the railroads coming to the table with significant funding, but Cook County has used funding derived from eliminating diversions to fill a really important gap and move our most important CREATE project forward. The City of Chicago is providing the necessary project engineering. Metra and Amtrak are stepping up as significant financial partners in a way to bring a wide variety of resources to solve a real problem that impacts not only the City of Chicago and the state of Illinois, but the country as a whole. On the construction side, we have a lot of major projects that are either nearing completion or are well underway. I talked to some people today, significant work that's happening on the Dan Ryan flyover. The centerpiece of the Burn Interchange project is coming to a conclusion of this phase. We hope to be opening that in the next 2 weeks, and I hope to be going out and looking at it before it gets open to see really what an amazing job our partners have done in really tough circumstances to build a really important project. Our job at I-55 and Lakeshore Drive is on schedule as well, and with completion of these two projects, it will greatly improve access to the city from two of its most important gateways. Downstate, we completed the improvement of I-70 and I-57, one of the largest projects ever in Eastern Illinois, and it's going to create a tremendous access and better economic opportunities for all of Eastern Illinois. We're starting construction of the I-74 bridge in the Quad Cities, the most expensive bridge project downstate in our history. And we're working with the Department of Natural Resources to return Illinois' waterways planning and project development to IDOT. Thanks. I think I might have said we were trying to do that last year. We're well along the way, and I think it's really important. Our ports and our waterways truly are one of our most underutilized assets. We need to work with the owners of our ports to take advantage of the real economic engine that ports can be to our local communities. From using drones for bridge inspections to deploying 3D technology for surveying to rolling out e-construction, we are embracing technology much more than we ever have under Governor Rauner's leadership. I talked a lot last time about autonomous vehicles. I didn't know that a year from now we'd be talking about it in a completely different way. They're here to stay. It's not the Jetsons, it's not the future, it is today, and it's happening right now. At the government level, we still need to develop a framework to address what kind of infrastructure we're going to need and the basic rules and regulations that we need to have in place. And those rules and regulations don't mean prohibiting autonomous vehicles, as was proposed by some members of the Chicago City Council. I believe that one of the earliest opportunities for autonomous vehicles is in goods movement. We're working with companies that want to pilot technologies here in Illinois, and we have to be more welcoming to those efforts. We need to coordinate those efforts with the Illinois State Police, with the Secretary of State, with the Department of Insurance, and others to make sure that new technologies feel at home here in Illinois and give us an opportunity to return to a real center for transportation innovation. This is a prime area that we're going to spend a lot of time on next year. We need to bring these new economic opportunities to Illinois while making our roadways more safe. You know, there's been a lot of hand-wringing about one fatal accident from a self-driving vehicle in Florida, and every fatality is an important fatality. But you know, here in Illinois, this year, for the first time in almost a decade, we're going to have 1,000 traffic deaths in our streets. Clearly, distracted driving is a bigger problem than I think any of us have anticipated, and automated vehicles will help reduce that driver error that is the most deadly problem that we face on our roadways. When we look at the challenges that we face in the upcoming years, reducing traffic fatalities is probably at the top of our list. We need to work together. We need to find ways to eliminate this. We got to think truly about how do we get to zero. That has to be the goal. That has to be where we are looking as we look at making our roadways more safe. But there remain other challenges. We need to create more opportunities for DBE, veteran-owned, and other small businesses to be successful in our transportation field. Governor Rauner's continuously said that economic opportunity needs to be for all of Illinois, and we in this industry need to work together to broaden the pool of potential firms and then making sure that they get the work that they need in order to succeed. I'm finishing up the 4th tour that I've had in the 2 years of all of our district offices to hear what's working and what's not working. These are fascinating to me, and when I was here before, I talked about we had lost that innovative edge here at IDOT, and I'm not sure that was true. Our team has great ideas, and that which I thought I was lost, I think we just weren't seeing what was happening on a day-to-day basis. Our team knows how to do things better, they know how to do things right, and we need to give them the resources in order to make that happen. But so often that the things that they need to do their job better, better technology, better equipment, more vehicles, have to be purchased. Our current procurement system prohibits us from giving our team what it needs in anything close to a timely manner. Procurement delivery has to be a priority for the state of Illinois if it's going to be an efficient deliverer of services. But as you know, our procurement problems aren't just about what we purchase. Since I got here, I've told you that we need to change SB 51 in ways that allow us to have meaningful conversations with you about the innovations that you can bring to the table that don't punish you when it comes to procurement time. What we have today is a system that makes no sense, and I'm going to continue to work with you to make that happen and make it happen sooner rather than later. And while funding issues for roads and bridges are coming along, we really don't have a funding system for transit, for rail, and for airports. Episodic bonding programs aren't the answer for what has become increasingly vital elements of our transportation system. We can't continue to have our transportation modes fighting against other general revenue needs in order to maintain and improve those systems. We need to continue to work with our partners to find a sustainable funding source that provides long-term, reliable resources for transit, rail, airports, and other non-highway modes. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a multi-year federal funding program that allows us some confidence in the resources that we're going to receive over the next few years. We also have a successful lockbox amendment that passed the public. I think what it shows generally to me is the public strongly believes in investing in transportation, but that the investments that they make in that system need to be used on that transportation system. With respect to the lockbox, IDOT will be taking a broad view of what is transportation. It's going to include transit. It's going to include our planning activities. It's going to include pedestrian improvements and many, many other activities that go into running and delivering a true transportation system. In the bigger picture, how we view infrastructure as an asset to be supported and maintained is something that needs some urgency behind it. People are driving more than ever. Traffic volumes in the U.S. reached 1.58 trillion miles in the first 6 months of 2016, the highest number in our history. But the condition of our system is not keeping up. Presently, 79% of our highways, 92% of our bridges are in good condition. By 2022, those numbers shrink to 61% of our roadways and 86% of our bridges. The value of our highway, bridge, local roads, rail, transit, and airs is well over $100 billion. If transportation is one of Illinois' most important assets, it needs to be maintained and it needs to be improved if we're going to grow our economy. With his business background, Governor Rauner understands this as well. We need to get Illinois back on track by creating jobs and creating lasting economic growth. Investing in a transportation system enables that growth, and it's one issue where there is relatively little disagreement. Illinois is the center of the transportation system of North America, and it drives the economies not only of Chicago and Illinois, but of all the Midwest. was talking to my brother-in-law over the holiday weekend about my nephews who are pretty good baseball players. And he went to a coaching seminar, and the speaker said that while everybody wants to, and everybody probably should, work on their weaknesses, what brings success is enhancing your strengths. He said if you're a singles hitter, find better ways to get on base. If you're a power hitter, focus on driving the ball. In Illinois, our strength is infrastructure. Together, let's focus our efforts on our strength and improve what drives Illinois' economy. Thank you very much.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Don Schaefter, Executive Vice President of the Midwest Truckers Association, about what the passage of the Safe Roads Amendment will mean for Illinois transportation. This runs about 20 minutes.
Don Schaefter, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel. We wanted to follow up with you from an earlier conversation. Now we're past the election, and one of the winners on the election was the constitutional amendment. That transportation money will now only be spent for transportation, where before it was being used by the legislature as kind of a piggy bank to subsidize some of the other areas of the budget that were falling short. For you and your members, what does it mean?
Well, I think very importantly, it's, as we have said in the past, this is a truth and taxation matter more than anything else. I mean, to people who, who pay a large amount of money in motor fuel tax, they buy a lot of fuel. They want to make sure that the money that they spent in these taxes is going to go for highway construction, repair, roads, bridges, other infrastructure, waterways, local governments, mass transit, all these different transportation modes that depend on motor fuel taxes for survival.
Randy Blankenhorn, Transportation Secretary, just spoke at the City Club of Chicago, laid out a number of issues where they're going to be now spending more money on different projects. Do we know how much more money this might actually mean if the money isn't being diverted into transportation projects?
Right now it's a little tough. I was there when he spoke this week, and I think they're waiting to get a better handle on this whole funding mechanism, because there's a lot of concerns right now about, have there been diversions this year? What kind of an impact has there been on the road funds? When the constitutional amendment is approved and is actually approved, which will happen coming up the next few days.
What's the mechanism of that?
Well, when the electorals, when it's approved, it's
by the Secretary of State's office,
and it all goes in. It's all going to be in place. But I think a lot of people are like, it's like a dog chasing a rabbit. He catches that rabbit. Now he says, now what? What do I do with it? And I think there's a lot of that out there. And there's different funding sources that are actually saying, well, how do we fit under that definition of transportation purposes? Secretary Blankenhorn said at the City Club, saying we have to take a close look at where some of this funding has gone. Does it in fact qualify for that money, and to get some I suppose legal opinion as to whether or not they can legally pay for certain items with road fund money. So I think right now we're sitting there saying, let's figure out where we're going with this, and then we'll take that next step. Long term, though, I think everyone agrees. It's a $500 million a year that is going to come back in the fold.
That's approximately how much it was.
Right.
About $500 million was being diverted.
We're talking $500 million on average. Some years it's been 600, 700, million. Other years it's been less. So we're talking what the average has been over many, many years. And the temptation has been there with the state's fiscal condition. There's been a lot of sweeps going on. A lot of special funds have been swept. Money which has been collected has never seen the light of day for the special projects and programs they're supposed to be used for. So this is.
And let me point out for the viewers that we have the general operating fund. People often refer to the budget as being in the neighborhood of, right now, about $38 billion. That's the general funds. There's a whole other part of the overall state budget that are the designated funds, and that's what we're talking about, the road funds. Every time we buy gas, so much money is diverted to the road funds. It's supposed to be spent on roads. It has been diverted. Now with that constitutional amendment, that money will stay in there for roads, or for transportation, I should say. Without a budget, and who knows when we'll have a budget with the political standoff, is that a factor in this, or because we have a funding mechanism, buying gas, and it goes into the road fund, or does it not matter that we have a budget?
Well, here's the one important thing to remember for the remainder of this fiscal year. General Assembly did appropriate money specifically for transportation to keep projects going. So, in fact, if there is a concern about money, the fact is that the mechanism is in place to fund these road projects that are out there. Now, on the other hand, there's other special funds out there. You know, when you buy fuel, you also pay a percentage of a penny for leaking underground fuel tanks. And it's a
gas stations, so they can be dug up. If they're leaking, we don't want them to keep leaking, right?
So they don't pollute the groundwater. And it's a remediation program. That's millions of dollars that have been collected out of that. Unfortunately, that's still being swept away. That money's been swept away, and very little has been done in terms of remediation over the last couple of years because the money's been swept out. If we look, beyond what's happening here in Springfield, in this building right now, there's a lot of, there are a lot of battles going on at all levels, and a budget does not seem to be a top priority of anyone right now. There's a lot of political battles going on that we're fighting other things, but the fact is that this amendment's in place. That money's going to be collected. It may sit in a pot for a while, but in fact, it is going to sit there, and it's money they cannot sweep.
Well, now we're going to have a new state comptroller. The comptroller pays the bills. If the Department of Transportation says we want $100 million to build a bridge, is the comptroller legally bound to say, okay, it's according to the amendment, the money's there, you're asking for it, here it is?
Well, the legislature has to appropriate the money. I mean, the state has a road program, and it's a detailed program with projects and different list of projects to be done and to be funded. That's done by the General Assembly, and it's been already appropriated for what we're in now, fiscal year 2017. We'll be good for that up until the end of June next year. We'll have to appropriate another program or another road program to go beyond that. But we do know that one thing is that the money's going to be in that pot. And you just can't come in and say, okay, give me $50 million, give me $60 million. It still has to go through the legislative process.
And we should point out obvious things. But, I mean, you're with the truckers, but it's going to help the guys that make cement for the roads, the iron workers, a whole bunch of people that work. I mean, there's a whole lot of trades that work on any construction project, and so that'll mean all those jobs and more, as now we're going to have those monies that would have otherwise been swept.
And we're in a real fiscal dilemma. I mean, and we're talking not just state road program. We're talking paratransits. We're talking ride sharing that's on the local level for mass transit. These little programs, and there's hundreds of them all over the place in Illinois, but they're suffering because of the dilemma we're in. This guarantees that seniors and the handicapped are going to get rides that they need under these mass transit programs. It means that local units of government are going to get the money they need, to do their basic projects in their cities. And we know that, we're looking at improving our waterways and all these, it's not just highways. Transportation's very broad in Illinois, and it's very dependent upon funding from both state and federal sources.
Let me interject, because the ag community has often talked to me about building the locks and dams, but they don't have the money. Would this be part of that? Could this be spent? I maybe as a matching fund with federal dollars, I guess it could be perhaps.
You know, a lot of these programs they're federal match. You know, it may be 10% state money, 90% federal. It may be 20-80. That's how a lot of road programs work. That's how a lot of federal programs work. States have to put up the match money to match the big bucks that come from Washington. And if you don't have it, then you can't, and the legislature doesn't appropriate the money, then our hands are tied.
You know, one thing, again, that Secretary Blankenhorn said the other day in his speech, he pointed out that a businessman said, your highways are my warehouses, meaning that my trucks are sitting there in traffic. You are the Midwest Truckers Association, so you cover multiple states in the Midwest. How does Illinois, transportation-wise, relative to truckers, how does it compare with the surrounding states?
Well, you got to remember, Illinois is the hub. And when I say Illinois, I mean not just the Chicago area, but also you get down to Metro East area, developing. It's growing, and even more so. And we're not just talking trucking, and we aren't talking just warehousing. We're talking logistics, the railroads. We have so many Class 1 railroads, and they all work together now. The airlines work. We have air hubs. One of the largest air hubs in the country now, Rockford, it keeps growing. And you have different hubs for the railroads, the trucking, the waterways, so dependent, grain haulers to move grain down south. So we have all this infrastructure here in Illinois. Nowhere else in the country do we have a combination of all these transportation modes working together. And you don't see it in Wisconsin, you don't see it in Indiana, you don't see it in Iowa. They all have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but here in Illinois we have everything. And that's what makes it such a fertile ground for development.
Well, and I talked to Larry Walsh, the county chairman, and he was bringing up that Amazon up in his neck of the woods has a phenomenally large distribution center. And recently they just had to do some highway work because there were so many trucks getting off the highway to feed that distribution center just from Amazon. And the point here, which again Blankenhorn addressed, was how integral the infrastructure of transportation is to economic development. You're not going to get those big distribution centers like an Amazon and all the jobs that go with that and the taxes coming back to the state if you are going to have trucks sitting in a line miles to get there. You got to have the access of the highways, right?
And you've got Amazon, for example, another 2 million square feet in warehouse that they're planning for the Joliet-Will County area. And, you know, we're actively involved, especially in Will County, serve on their Freight Advisory Council, and work with the shippers, government entities, all the players up there, I suppose you could say, to develop, at least to manage what I would say is the fastest growing transportation hub in the country. People don't realize, but especially when you talk about intermodal containers and intermodal loading and offloading, it is one of the largest in the world. And we're not just talking...
Explain what intermodal means, because people...
Everyone probably has seen an intermodal container. You see them on the railroad being carried.
Well, I should say, so when we see a train going by, and it's not a typical train car, but what you see are basically like the what do we call it? The trailers that would be drawn by a truck, right? And that might be coming in from off a ship on the West Port, from California, Long Beach, California. It arrives in Illinois. It's taken off the train, and then the truck delivers it to wherever locally it would be going. That's the concept?
And that's a very simple way to to say how it works. But these intermodal containers are coming from Long Beach, California, Prince Rupert, British Columbia, Galveston, Texas, and with the opening of the Panama Canal, the new Panama Canal, they're going to be coming from all over the East Coast also, which means a lot more efficiencies are going to be built into intermodal traffic. For example, 1 block away here from the Capitol, We have probably one of the main lines for moving intermodal trailers from down south. Coming up, what are they talking, 20 train loads a day of containers that are going up to Joliet. And this is how traffic moves now.
Yeah, we're also talking about, I guess, some of that money would go into maybe the so-called high-speed rail. Some people argue it's not high-speed relative to like a France or a Japan, but it's faster speed rail, which might help for getting back from a St. Louis to a Chicago or a Springfield to Chicago.
Well, what's happening is that what they're trying to do is speed up the movement of those containers. You unload them at an ocean port, and to get them, inland, as quickly as possible, expedite the movement. And if you can do it in 2 days instead of 3, that's very important for a shipper, and it's also very important for the customer.
Well, it's important. Let's say if you're a manufacturer and you've got to have a part or your supplies to keep manufacturing, you don't want to be waiting a week for something or days. You got to have it when you got to have it, right?
And what's happening, though, also is that the infrastructure, the demands on infrastructure, it takes funding. And if you see what's happening in Will County, the Joliet area, we're talking about adding the additional lane, the managed toll lane to I-55 from Interstate 355 all the way into the city to relieve some of that traffic and to give an extra route, an extra lane of traffic for the movement. We're talking about building the Humboldt Road Bridge, which would be an extension off of Interstate 80 into these intermodal facilities on the south side of Joliet. This is a joint program to be built by Centerpoint Properties, by Will County, City of Joliet, State of Illinois. And then it would be a toll bridge, but they're all working together to provide more access into these intermodal facilities, because right now Interstate 55, Illinois Route 53, Interstate 80 they're just totally pressured to be able to handle all this intermodal container traffic that's moving on trucks that are trying to get them distributed.
Well, let me ask the last question. So we have the amendment in place. It's going to be all certified, I guess, shortly. At what point does the rubber meet the road in the terms of dollars, extra dollars, or has that process already started? Does the Department of Transportation, is everyone now saying, hey, those dollars are going to be there, now we can go ahead with this project that was on the back burner, or now we can do more than we were planning to do because we know the dollars will be there? Where are we in that process?
I think there's a lot of policy issues that still have to be discussed, and I think we also have to play into the impact President-elect Trump's proposal for $1 trillion infrastructure program. Is it going to drop a lot more into the state's hands? Because the feds are going to come back and say, well, we're going to give you an extra couple $100 million a year if this plan plays out. Are you going to have the match to do it? That's why this is even more important, is to have this amendment implemented, put into place, get the policy decisions made on the state level so we can be ready to answer the demand from the federal government to be able to spend this money to improve infrastructure, be it water, air, rail, or highways.
Yeah, because otherwise it could have cost us millions of dollars in lost federal funds because we couldn't come up with a match.
And we've been in this problem for the last couple of years. Unless we had appropriated this money during this current session of the General Assembly, we would have walked away from tens of millions of dollars of federal funding for Illinois transportation projects. So, obviously these policy issues have to be discussed, have to be implemented so we can get ready for what's going to come, hopefully, from Washington and Congress.
Don Schaefter, thanks, and maybe sometime later in the spring we can follow up and see where we are in these things.
It'll be interesting to see where we are. It really will.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Next, from Chicago, Illinois Channel correspondent Jeff Berkowitz sits down with the Manhattan Institute's Heather McDonald as she discusses her book, The War on Cops. This runs about 30 minutes.
You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game, and we will be doing lots of politics and public policy this evening because we have as our guest Heather McDonald. Look, getting right to it, Heather's written this book, The War on Cops, right?
Right.
So just tell me, you're here in Chicago, we're taping it, it's at Nico's Hysteria, right here in the Gold Coast. We're taping this show on September 28th. And when was it? 2016? Just about 2 years ago. Laquan McDonald. You know that name?
Sure.
Okay. So the copper gets out. 6 cops are there. They're doing nothing. He gets out of his car. 16 shots in 16 seconds. This kid's doing nothing. He's got a small knife, African American, harming nobody, dead. And then there's a cover-up by the state's attorney, I'd say. Okay, not a cover-up, but a year later, she still hasn't indicted. The video, you got to know this after a month or two, murder. A year goes by, nothing from the state's attorney. The mayor keeps the video out. He's reelected. War on cops or war on blacks? Come on. Laquan McDonald.
Laquan McDonald was an appalling shooting and an appalling response by the police department. That the false narrative that was put out by those cops and not blocked by Superintendent Gary McCarthy or the Detectives Bureau was a complete betrayal of the public trust. But that's one police shooting. This year in Chicago, 3,000 people have been shot. If the Black Lives Matter narrative was correct, since practically all those 3,000 victims have been black, you would assume that cops are responsible for a considerable part of those shootings. In fact, the cops have shot 18 people, 6 of them lethally, virtually all armed and dangerous. That's 0.6% of all people who've been shot in Chicago. Absolutely, the police need better tactical training, not to have made the appalling tactical decisions that resulted in the Laquan McDonald shooting. But you could remove all police shootings, either in Chicago or in the country as a whole, stop them entirely, and you would have a negligible effect on the black death by homicide rate, because blacks are being killed overwhelmingly by other blacks.
Of course, you're right on the numbers. I'd like to see, we'll have somebody from the other side on to give their view, but I'd like to hear what they say in response to your numbers. But still, if you're in the black community and you see, it's bad enough when a black shoots another black, but when the police, who are there to protect and serve, come out and just kill you, there's no excuse, right, for Laquan McDonald. Maybe he's crazy, and that would be the excuse, but he's been on the force for 10 or 15 years. This isn't the first issue. And when that happens, I think we got like 12,000 cops here in Chicago. Just take a guess. Of those 12,000, you think there are a few others like that cop who shot Laquan McDonald?
Jeff, I have said this was a bad shooting. I think the criminal prosecution is appropriate. I think the cover-up was a stain on the Chicago Police Department and justifiably adds to mistrust of the police. But the perception that we are living through an epidemic of police shootings of black males is completely a media creation. Last year,
Michael Brown?
Absolutely. Well, we know that Michael Brown, that was a
Eric
hoax.
Garner?
Michael Brown, that was a lie. He was not hands up, don't shoot. He was attacking Officer Darren Wilson.
It was a justified righteous shoot, you're saying, because he was grabbing for a gun. Is that it?
That's what the Justice Department found. Don't take my word for it. People in the community who saw the facts, they were terrified to be served with a grand jury subpoena. They barricaded themselves in their apartments with couches, because if they had told the truth about that shooting, the backlash against them would have been so great. The pressure to maintain the false narrative was so great. That Michael Brown is an appropriate emblem of the Black Lives Matter narrative, because it is the whole movement is based on a lie, which is that there's an epidemic.
The whole movement?
The idea that we are living through an epidemic of racially biased police shootings of blacks is a lie. And let me explain to you why, Jeff.
Okay.
Last year, the police shot 987 people fatally. 50% of all victims were white. 26% were black. Now, if the media focused on those white victims, we might think that we were living through an epidemic of police shootings of whites.
Bad things happen to both whites and blacks. That's your point?
Exactly.
By cops. It's not racial. Some mistakes happen, some very bad mistakes.
There are bad shootings.
Okay.
But blacks, the 20s, let's look at the 26% share of fatal shootings that are of black victims. That is actually less than would be predicted by blacks' violent crime rates. In the 75 largest counties in this country, blacks are 15% of the population. They commit nearly 2/3 of all violent crime. Police shootings are going to occur where police most encounter armed and resisting suspects. And unfortunately, given the vast disparities in violent crime rates, that is in minority communities on behalf of minority victims, and the police will be given descriptions of minority suspects. The police don't wish this reality. It's forced on them by the reality of crime. This year alone, 4 academic studies have come out that turn the Black Lives Matter narrative on its head. They show that if there's a bias in police shootings, it works in favor of blacks, not against them. Again, this is hard to believe.
What it is, just tick them off real quick. Can you tick them off?
Sure.
What are the 4 studies?
Lois James in Washington State University did the most sophisticated scenario-based simulation.
Have to go through it. Just tick them off. What are the 4 studies? I want people to know where they
Lois
can go
James
look.
from Washington State University, Roland Fryer, a black Harvard economist, the Center for Policing Equity, and Ted Miller, an economist in Maryland in injury prevention.
So you're telling me Lester Holt got hold of this, and when he was doing the presidential debate the other night, Lester Holt from NBC, he saw what you're saying, and he said, I'm going to correct some of this. We're going to ask Hillary about this and see what she thinks. Is that what happened?
If only.
If only. So why doesn't that happen? Did you think of trying to get in touch with Lester before, and do you think he would have paid attention to your 4 studies? Because you know what happened. Tell the people what happened. What happened in that debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton about this issue?
Well, Lester Holt continued this idea that somehow a federal judge has declared every single pedestrian stop that the police make in the country unconstitutional. No federal judge has the power to do that.
Tell us what happened. Who was the federal judge, and what did he do? She do?
This is a federal judge in New York City, Shira Scheindlin, who violated judicial ethics by encouraging groups like the Legal Aid Society, the New York Civil Liberties Union, to file lawsuits against the New York Police Department, and she promised that she would steer them into her courtroom. She already knew what her rulings were going to be, and she has presided over a trilogy of lawsuits against the New York Police Department.
So what happened to her as a result of?
She was removed from after ruling against the New York Police Department. Her judgment was taken on appeal to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which their first ruling said that she should be taken off the case because she violated judicial ethics.
And then there was a change in management, so to speak. When that appeal was going on, who was the mayor of the city of Chicago?
It began under Michael Bloomberg,
so he was
who was a
the
big
appeal.
supporter of proactive policing.
Stop, question, and frisk.
Among other techniques, yes.
And then he was replaced by?
Our Sandinista-loving progressive mayor, Bill de Blasio, he of two
Put
New
out
Yorks.
there so fairly, fair and balanced.
I'm
right?
sorry, who told this? The New York Times.
Okay, so replaced by de Blasio, and the police chief in New York is?
Well, it was William Bratton until very recently.
And Bratton, apparently, from your book, The War on Cops, you discussed this issue. Mm-hmm. So that's why I learned about it, folks. War on Cops, Heather McDonald. Here we go. There's the camera, Jeff. Heather McDonald, The War on Cops. A really good read. And you can read it quickly because I read it almost in the last day.
Oh.
Even though I got it, I sat on it, but, you know.
Speed reader or else?
It's good. No.
Skimming.
So you go through that whole incident. But what I was curious about, and you would know, you're with the Manhattan Institute in New York. You're a fellow there. Mm-hmm. You write for the City Journal,
right,
published out of New York.
Yes.
So you're a New Yorker, true and true. So Bratton started all of this stop and frisk, I learned from you, I think, in '94, and it was very effective. He goes off and sort of does the same thing right in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Police chief there, comes back to be as police chief again now under de Blasio.
Really?
So he supported de Blasio in not appealing this issue. Is that right? On
right.
stop and frisk.
Right.
Okay.
De Blasio had run against the NYPD.
And so Lester Holt, when he said to Trump, look, the court held it was unconstitutional because blacks were being discriminated against by stop and frisk. So many blacks were being stopped and not many whites. Isn't that what Lester Holt said? I'm paraphrasing.
I mean,
Lester kind of got
I don't
it
know if he
all
went into that amount.
a little bit because Trump then tried to explain and said, no, that's not what happened. And I'm not sure what he said exactly. He didn't know the ins and outs about the judge being removed. But in a sense, Holt was fact-checking Trump and got it wrong. Seriously, don't you think he did? Or am I going too far?
Well, yes, he overstated it again.
Okay.
Stop, question, and frisk is a constitutional power that all police have. The judge cannot declare stop, question, frisk per se unconstitutional.
And if the judge does that, then it goes up on appeal to the circuit court and eventually, if they want, to the Supreme Court.
Yes, I mean, she was talking about as applied by the New York Police Department.
Okay, not the whole general concept,
Can't.
which is kind of what
the
Holt was
Supreme
saying.
Court in 1965 said gave its constitutional imprimatur on a long-standing. It's simple common sense. Police officers have to be able to use their knowledge of crime conditions, local communities, suspicious behavior in order to intervene in suspicious behavior before it ripens into a felony. You do not. What's going on in Chicago right now is officers are driving by suspicious behavior. They are driving by the large groups of kids hanging out on corners fighting.
As some Black Lives Matter people now say, because they're not doing this. Aren't some Black Lives Matter people saying the police are being derelict because they're driving by?
Yes, Sean King, one of the big activists. The hypocrisy is simply stunning. These are the same people who, for the last 2 years, have been accusing cops of racism, for stops, for broken windows policing. And then when they see the consequences of depolicing, now they say they're being derelict. But let me just say they are not being derelict. This is a discretionary activity. Cops do not have to get out of their cars. They have to respond to 911 calls. That's reactive policing. That's after there's been a victim. And in Chicago, officers are still running to those calls when somebody's been robbed or somebody's been shot.
But they're not being proactive.
They're not being proactive, but that is within their
and not
discretion.
proactive.
Right, and that takes us back to the pre-1990s policing revolution.
And what was that theory that Bratton brought into New York with Giuliani?
Bratton brought in an entire sea change in how policing thought about itself, which is we don't react to crime, we have the capacity to lower it.
2 words I'm looking for. 2 words.
Data-driven proactive policing.
And
CompStat.
2 more words. Data-driven,
accountable. Accountable. Broken windows.
What's data? Oh, sorry. Broken windows. Data-driven. Tell people about that. Why was that so important in New York? What was the revolution there?
Until Bratton came in, top brass who were responsible ultimately, should be, for the public safety, did not know what crime was until 6 months after the fact. It sort of dawned on Bratton and his commanders that this is not the ideal way to stop crime. So they started demanding timely information, initially on a daily basis, eventually on an hourly basis.
Got it. As the computer revolution occurred, CompuStat was there. They asked where were the crimes occurring so we could redeploy police. That worked. Giuliani was all for that. People in New York loved it. They loved Giuliani. The blacks loved it. The whites loved it because blacks are the people who suffer the most from crime. If it's disproportionately done by blacks, they're not running up here in Chicago to Winnetka. They're doing it in Inglewood where blacks live. The bad guys are often blacks. The good guys are black. Black on black crime. They would love it if we did more. I don't even know. Do you know in Chicago, are we doing CompuStat? Are we doing data-driven police work here in Chicago? Do you know? I don't know.
Sure.
We
Absolutely.
are. So it spread like wildfire. This concept started in New York, but in most of the inner cities, it's mimicked now?
Well,
until recently, at least?
Well, there's still, I'm sure, crime analysis meetings. Gary McCarthy, your previous superintendent,
right.
who Emmanuel made the scapegoat, but he was complicitous in holding back the Laquan McDonald video. McCarthy ran CompStat in New York City. He brought the New York City style of CompStat to Chicago, which ruffles feathers.
Okay. So
of course. And I'm sure Jody Weiss was doing it before him. It's very aggressive. The New York style, you bring a precinct commander in, and you basically, it's viewed as humiliating. The top brass are absolutely ruthless. putting him on the hot seat. And if he does not know about every single shooting and robbery in his precinct over the last month and was ready with a strategy to combat it, his career is in jeopardy, if not over.
Broken windows came in New York, came in other places. What's that?
This is the response to low-level public order offenses. It is quintessentially what I hear in Chicago, what I hear in the South Bronx is kids are trespassing in my lobby and smoking weed. I'm terrified to go down and get my mail. They're hanging out on
What's
the corners.
Woman's name? You mentioned that in the book.
Mrs. Sweeper, an elderly cancer
Tell
amputee.
about Mrs. Sweeper. It's important. She's a real person.
She's
this is
a
what Hillary
real
and Trump
person.
do. You do it. Tell us about Mrs. Sweeper.
Listen, these voices have to be heard because they are silenced by the mainstream media. This is an elderly cancer amputee. She has an Obama poster in her apartment, Ringley's Brothers, a prayer to Obama. She lives in the Mount Hope section of the Bronx. She told me, please, Jesus, send more police. The only time she feels safe to go into her building lobby to get her mail is when the police are there because it's otherwise colonized by trespassing youth, hanging out and smoking weed.
So that small stuff that cops go after under the broken window theory, if there's a broken window, get out there, find out who did it, clean it up, because the theory is if you're concerned about the small things, you'll also be there for the larger things. Is that right?
That's one aspect of the theory.
What
is that
other aspects?
Well, it is true that by stopping people, questioning them, and possibly summoning them for misdemeanors, you often interrupt a felony at a later time. If guys are hanging out on a corner at 11 a.m., drinking in publicly, if you can get up and pour out their 40-ounce malt, you're probably averting a stabbing at 11 p.m. So that's one aspect, which is the stopping felony crime. But I would argue that even if you could not make that argument that by enforcing low-level crimes you stop felony crimes, regardless, broken windows policing is a moral imperative because that's what the law-abiding residents of these high-crime areas beg the police to do.
Mrs. Sweeper, the
Mrs.
minorities,
Sweeper,
the African Americans, the
Baltimore,
blacks, the people who are getting pummeled by these criminals.
The Justice Department recently came out with a scathing review of the Baltimore Police Department. They objected to corner clearing. Lo and behold, the Baltimore Sun and the Washington Post both, within weeks of the Justice Department report, went to a few community police meetings at long last. The Justice Department lambasted them for corner clearing. What did they hear? What did the reporters hear? Why aren't you clearing the corners? What are the police supposed to do?
Chris Wallace is doing the third debate. Why don't you spend some time with Chris? You've been on O'Reilly. You've been on Fox and Friends. These people listen to you. How great would it be? A 90-minute debate, 10 minutes of Trump and Hillary having this kind of back and forth. Hillary talking about she's supporting Barack. We had Barack on six times. We have made enormous progress in race relations, said our president, after Ferguson. But there are still problems. And Hispanics and African Americans aren't just making these problems up. So you're going to respond to that. The law too often feels like it is being applied in a discriminatory fashion. What would you say to the president? And then tell me what you're going to say to Chris Wallace to get him to discuss this.
Well, feeling may be one thing, reality is another. If you have the President of the United States, the Democratic presidential contender, the entire mainstream media telling blacks that they live in a racist criminal justice system that treats them differently, it's not surprising that if they are stopped, they're going to feel that that's a result of racism. But every criminologist who's looked at this, no matter their political orientation, and the vast majority of them are pretty darn liberal to left, have been forced to conclude that the overrepresentation of blacks in prison is due to criminal offending and not to racism. If blacks are right hours before 5 Dallas officers were assassinated in July because of the Black Lives Matter narrative, President Obama saw
Can
fit.
you blame it on Black Lives Matter?
I certainly can. This was somebody who said, I am out to kill whites and kill white cops in particular, who hated cops, who believed he was...
He said he was upset by Black Lives Matter. I think he was upset
yes,
by the
absolutely.
same things. Is probably what he
so,
meant.
so Obama, 3 hours before this shooting, said blacks are arrested at twice the rate of whites. Now, I don't know that particular statistic, but I happily concede it to President Obama. I'm sure it's true. Blacks because blacks commit homicide at 8 times the rate of whites and Hispanics combined.
You're sure of that? You're sure of that?
Yes, it's federal data.
They commit these things. They're arrested. They're convicted. You don't think it's that we have racist prosecutors, we have a racist judicial system. You think these are righteous convictions, is what you're telling me.
Homicides are the gold standard. Blacks die of homicide at 6 times the rate of whites and Hispanics combined. Do we think that's because of racist emergency rooms? No, the bodies are there. The convictions are there. In New York City, this is what victims and witnesses tell the New York Police Department. This is not New York Police Department talking. This is victims and witnesses. They tell the police that blacks commit 75% of all shootings in New York City, though they're 23% of the population. Add Hispanic shootings to black shootings, and you account for 98% of all shootings in New York City. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough, Jeff. This is not the police speaking. These are people in those communities giving descriptions of shooters. Whites in New York City are 34% of the population. According to victims and witnesses of shootings, they commit less than 2% of all shootings. Chicago, victims and witnesses tell the Chicago police 80% of all shootings are committed by blacks, though they're less than a third of the population. Whites are the same percentage as the Chicago police population. They commit less than 1% of all shootings.
So what is happening now? We're taping this on September 28th. In the last year or two, some people, you might be one of them, contend there's been a spike up. So after a long-term, 2-decade-long, maybe longer decline in crime, we're now seeing in certain areas, in certain inner cities, an increase in the murder rate, certainly here in Chicago. Some would say at least 7 or 8 other areas in Baltimore and D.C. where we've seen adjustments. That is, we've seen less proactive policing because of the war on cops, you might contend. And so we have less of that going on. Crime is coming back. One, is that your view?
Let me just say, let me just put this on the record.
Yeah.
I coined the term the Ferguson effect, which is the twin phenomenon of officers backing off of proactive policing under the phony narrative of Black Lives Matter, that they're racist for trying to save lives in black neighborhoods. And as a result of that depolicing, crime shooting up in high crime areas above all black cities. And is this now some speculative hypothesis on my part? No, it is not. This week on Monday, the FBI finally came out with the nationwide data on crime in the whole country that confirms what I have been saying for the last 2 years.
Through the whole country it's spiking now? Is that what you're saying?
Homicides nationally
are going up.
In cities that report data are up 12%. That is almost an unprecedented 1-year increase over the last half century. In some cities between the population of 250,000 to 500, it's up 20%. And if you look at specific cities, it's up much higher. The victims overwhelmingly black. There is no question that the Ferguson effect is operating in cities today, and unless we change this false narrative, it's going to get worse.
Tell me, are there 8, 10, 12, 20 cities, inner cities across the country where you're seeing a spiking of crime in the last year or two? Would that be your contention?
Cleveland last year was up 90%. In September, in one month alone, 3 children under the age of 5 were gunned down in drive-by shootings fatally, leading the black police chief to break down in tears and say, we all protest when a police officer kills one of us. Why do we protest when we kill each other? Milwaukee up 73%, Washington, D.C. up 54%. Chicago last year was up about 25%, I think. This year is going to be about 50%.
Some people
Minneapolis.
some people contend Chicago is driving the national data. If you take out Chicago, you may have increases, but not so strong. Would you disagree with that statement? Is Chicago driving the national spiking?
Chicago is a big contributor, but there is serious spikes going on elsewhere. Baltimore
How many
last year.
cities? 10, 15 other cities? Just give me a ballpark.
10. One study looked at 10. Richard Rosenfeld, who was started out as a Ferguson effect denier, then had a major change of heart to his credit for the Justice Department, no less, singled out 10 cities with
Two more quick things. Heather McDonald, Yale undergrad, Stanford Law School, 15 years or so at the Manhattan Institute as a senior fellow, City Journal, regular contributor on education, on race, on education, which we should have gotten to. We'll have you back. Yes, we haven't talked about any of the root causes. I know you understand that and have things to say. But take a minute and tell me, what have I missed? What have I missed in the war on cops that we haven't talked about that's crucial that people know? And two, if somebody were here from Black Lives Matter and your Stanford Law, you can argue anything. Give me what you think would be their best argument against you.
Black Lives Matter movement advocates would invoke the names of Michael Brown and Tamir Rice and Walter Scott and Eric Garner. Some of those names, I completely agree with them. Those were atrocious shootings.
You give them that. You can see that.
But they will not be able to respond to my statistics. They will not be able to prove that there is a disproportionate, when you take crime into account, a disproportionate killing of black males going on. In fact, as I say, it is less than crime rates would predict. What we've not discussed is the whole narrative about mass incarceration and the claim that the drug war is driving the black prison population. Completely false, as is the claim that the black prison population represents systemic criminal justice racism. Again, false, it represents crime. Well, I'm going to go back to that original root cause, which is fathers. I think, yes, charter schools are a second best solution, as is policing. You can eat away at the problem. I believe in KIPP. I like structure. I like order in schools. I like high expectations, no excuse for behavioral improprieties. But the most important thing is to start talking about kids need mothers and fathers. Single mothers, many are heroic, doing the best they possibly can by their kids, but the odds are against them, and statistics are unequivocal here. Children raised by single mothers face a much greater chance of getting involved in the criminal justice system. Your mayor, Rahm Emanuel, just gave a speech about gun violence in Chicago. He promised more cops. He promised community policing, as if any department would ever admit to not doing community policing. I mean, we're supposed to forget that, of course, McCarthy said he was doing, everybody says they're doing community policing. He talked about mentors. He talked about more investment in communities. He did not have the guts to say the one word that really mattered, which is fathers. Mentors are, again, a second best solution. If you want to get at the root cause, boys will tell you they need their fathers.